Good morning, everyone. Again, good to have you here this morning. I want to say welcome to those of you on Facebook Live as well. We're so thankful that you join each week on this Facebook Live experience. Please let us know where you're watching from as well. And also, welcome to Exeter. We're so thankful that you're gathering together this morning. My name is Ron. I'm the pastor of Vital Point. And if you're gathering in Exeter and if you're new in Exeter, gathering for the first time with us, we're so excited that you're here joining us this way. And we hope that you'll come back and that you'll explore faith and who Jesus and who church is in your life. And that would be fantastic. So we're excited about Exeter. Okay, I'm going to start off my conversation this morning with a very, very, very important question. I want participation from everybody, all right? How many of you played with Lego when you were a kid? Yeah, right? Some of you aren't admitting it. Come on. How many of you still play with Lego? Yeah, see, we got some, yeah. And your kids aren't with you if you have kids. Like, yeah. So I got to tell you a story. When I was a kid growing up, I had this friend. He was a little bit older than me. He was like the master Lego builder. Like it was crazy. Now you got to keep in mind this was long before the fancy kits that you can buy now. He had the ability to build like jets and race cars and castles. And I would look at what he would build with his Lego, and I would go home and I would try to build the same things. And I realized very quickly that God did not give me the gift of Lego building, that he gave it to my friend Todd. And I had to figure out how to build these things, and it just looked horrible, and so I would just scrap the idea and not worry about it. When you think about Legos, they're very fascinating things. Now I've come to realize if you follow me on my social, I posted this on my Instagram this week, this very block. It's live in the room now, not just virtual, it's there. Believe me, it's not some 3D thing. So I posted it, then I was quickly informed by a friend of mine whose son is 5, informed me that this is not Lego. This is not a piece of Lego, but you know what? You get the gist of it, right? It's some other name. What is it? Duplo. Thank you. They told me backstage what it was, but it just gone. I just to me, it's Lego. Lego came about in late 1940s from Denmark. It was designed to obviously play with. I think the definition of Lego is to play well. I bet you didn't know that. Yeah, you might know what this is called, but Lego is to play well. These are fascinating little pieces because of themselves, they're nothing, right? All it is a piece of plastic with a few connectors. They're designed to do what? They are designed to connect with other pieces of Lego. They're designed to connect with one another. This afternoon, if you're a grandparent and your grandchild comes over and says, "Grammy, can we play Lego?" You're not going to take one and put it in front of them and say, "Have fun. Go at it. Play with this for hours." They do that with Tupperware, but they may not do that with Lego, right? No, you take the whole box and you dump it on the table, and then your grandchild gets to do what? Gets to play with Lego for hours on end, hopefully, to build in the time. And then you use the excuse as a grandparent to say, "I played with Lego this afternoon." Now, I was thinking about this again this week, and it's an interesting thing because when I think about Lego, it's actually really a real life thing for us. It's more than just a piece of plastic with a few connectors, because when I look at this little piece of Lego, you know what I see? I see human connection. This was created to be in connection with other pieces, and we are created to be in connection with one another. Human connection. Whether or not you believe that God created human beings or not, whether you believe in the existence of God, you might be an atheist, or you might be agnostic, or maybe you do believe in the creation story. It doesn't matter. Let's just all assume that we are on the same page with this idea that God created human beings. And when he created the first human being named Adam, he created him from the dust of the ground and then breathed life into him, and he gave him the responsibility to be in charge of the garden of all of creation. He had access to absolutely everything. But then God noticed something about Adam, that he was missing something. Human connection. He recognized that creating human beings in his image, that they were created for connection. And so what did God do? God created Eve out of the side of Adam. Therefore, he had a human connection. There is nothing more beautiful exciting and also terrifying at the same time, is that when we cross paths with another human being and we find some sort of connection with that person, we begin to realize what we're designed for. Because each and every one of us, hear my voice, are designed for human connection. It doesn't matter if you're an extrovert or an introvert. It doesn't matter if you're the jock at school or in the learning commons 2 weeks before the exam. Learning commons, for those of you who don't know what that is now called, that used to be called a library. Learning commons. That's why I never went to the learning commons. It doesn't matter if you're the life of the party or if you want to sit in front of the fire this afternoon reading a book. We are all created for human connection. We're in this series right now. This is week 2 in a series called Abide. And what we've been looking at is some teachings around Jesus' life that helps us understand what the Christian faith is about. And what we've been talking about is this idea of abiding in Him. It's this little verse found in John chapter 15, verse 4. It says, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it's severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me." See, what we're discovering in the context of what Jesus is teaching about life and about faith is that life and faith and nourishment of our faith is found in connection with Jesus. That word remain is the same word as abide, and so that's where we get our series from. And so we look at these things in our lives where we begin to realize that it's not about my religious activity that nourishes my soul. It is actually found in the relationship with Jesus as the one who creates the nourishment in my life. Jesus taught this in John chapter 15. The listeners would have known exactly what he's talking about because they would have been walking amongst the vineyards. They would have known what it was like to see a visible example of what he was talking about. They would have known very clearly that when a branch is connected to the vine, that there's life and there's fruit and there's vibrancy and there's nourishment. But if a branch is not connected to the vine, then what happens is it dries up and it withers up and it dies. And there's this beautiful imagery that Jesus is trying to help us with. So that means when we are in a right relationship with Jesus, there is this nourishment, there is this thing called fruit that is developed in our lives, which is like love and joy and peace. And there's these evidences of the fruit of what God is doing in our lives through the Holy Spirit and a relationship with Jesus. But the thing that we've been talking more strategically about is this idea that when we remain in Him, abide in Him, is that we begin to develop patterns and rhythms and spiritual disciplines that allow us to create a co-partnering with Jesus in the nourishment of our souls. So it's not just some passive thing that we do sitting on the couch with our feet up. It is this co-partnering, it is this entering into development of the rhythms and patterns that bring to life this relationship. So last week we talked about this when we launched the series. We talked about meditational prayer. We talked about this idea that Jesus gave us an example of what He calls us to do is to create the space to slow down, to enjoy the relationship with Him through meditational prayer, which is this calling to attention the truths of God, the invitation of God to speak to us through meditational prayer. And the problem for some of us is that we're going through life too quickly, and with such a pace and calendars that are full, we become spiritually dehydrated. And so last week the challenge was slow down, take some time, develop patterns of meditational prayer. If you missed that, you can listen to that on our app or on Facebook from last week. But today, there's a thought that I don't know if we think too much about the human connection as it relates to Jesus, because sometimes we don't see Jesus like this, but Jesus had friends. Jesus had friends. He had friends that He would go on walks with. He had friends that He would go on boating trips with. He had friends that He would have dinner with. He would have campfires with. He would tell stories with. Now, we often refer to them as disciples, but they were His friends. They were the ones that He hung out with, the ones that He did life with. Jesus had friends. He had human connection. And He gives us this example so clearly in a moment in Jesus' life that it's just a small little section of the Bible that sometimes we can just read over and completely miss. I want to read it for you. as it relates to human connection and the idea of the Lego blocks. I'm going to read it for you. It's in Matthew chapter 26, verse 36 it starts. It says, "Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, 'Sit here while I go over there to pray.' He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, 'My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.'" What's happening? This is the night in which Jesus was betrayed. This is the night prior to Jesus going to the cross before his death. Jesus is hanging around with his friends, his disciples, and he's having a meal with them just prior to this moment. They've had a meal together, and there's depth to this meal that they're experiencing together. And then he invites the 11 of his friends. One of them had already gone off to betray Jesus. The guy's name is Judas. He's now gone. And Jesus takes the 11. He goes into the olive garden called Gethsemane, and he goes there to pray. He says to the 8, "You stay here. I am going to go over here." But then what does he do? He takes 3 Lego friends with him a little bit farther, and he says to Peter, James, and John, "You stay here. I'm going there to pray." He says, "I want you to watch with me." Now, interesting. There's something that happens in this moment, in the interaction between Jesus and his 3 friends. He opens up to them. Did you see those 2 words? Anguish and distressed. Anguished and distressed. It means that there was a deep sorrow that was crushing him on the inside. Jesus in this moment does what? He invites the 3 into the sacred space of human connection and vulnerability. He opens up a part of his life and he brings them in. This is Jesus. Just so we're all clear, he is the Son of God. Just so we're clear, he is most powerful. He has all authority given to him, but yet he has the connection with Peter, James, and John. He invites them into that sacred space, and he opens up to them and says, with deep, deep sorrow, and says, "I feel like I'm being crushed." He didn't want to die, but it felt like he was going to die, and it was the circumstances were paralyzing him. See, Jesus in this moment gives us a very clear picture that in order for us to truly understand what it means to abide in him, we must then also put in the rhythms and patterns that he had, which means you and I, we need human connection like Jesus did. See, when we find ourselves in this space of learning to abide in the Lego imagery, what we begin to realize is that we're inviting people into the inner space, the sacred space of who we are, the space of vulnerability, so that people can have an influence in our lives and so that we can be encouraged as well. Those 2 words I want you to think about is influence and encouragement. There's something that I discovered in my study this week as I was putting this conversation, this talk together, is that there's this thing that scientists tell us that we have, and some of you probably already know this, but because I'm not a scientist, I'm a preacher, I came across this. It says this, that our brains have a specialized cell called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons. Are you still with me? Okay, good. The cells cause us to mirror what the other person is doing. We often do this without even realizing it. We have this wiring in our brains, this cell in our brains called mirror neurons. I was fascinated by this, so this week I did some testing of it. I did. No one knew. Nobody knew. Yesterday we had our Alpha Day. It was the Holy Spirit Alpha Day. We're doing this Alpha course, which is like these 12 videos on the Christian faith, and there's 30 some of us are taking this together at the church. It's been amazing. So yesterday, I put the mirror neurons into test. I did. We mirror each other. So I'm standing talking to an individual, and I thought, I'm going to see how this works. So I went like this. 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden, he went like this. And then I thought, I'm going to scratch my nose. What did this person do? They scratched their ear. No, they scratched their nose, right? This was awesome. Here's the challenge for you. If you get nothing else from the conversation, this afternoon, go for coffee with someone and start scratching your nose. Yeah. Go to the grocery store. I did this with my wife. She invited me to the grocery store, and I hate going to the grocery store. It was actually Remark, and it's like super tight, and it's like I don't want to bump into people, and so I kind of got off the side. So I started actually smiling at people. It's like creepy, right? It's like, who's the creepy guy? It's like, you know what happened? People started smiling back at me. It was awesome. Have you ever watched those videos on Facebook where, someone's watching a funny video on their phone, they got headphones in, no one can see what they're watching, but they're just dying laughing? It's so great. And they pan back and everybody on the bus is laughing. Have you ever seen that? Am I the only one? Yeah, okay. Yeah. I wasn't going to share this, but I have to. It's kind of making fun of myself. Back in the day when you would fly, when they only had one screen and you had to, didn't have the choice of all these things, you remember that show Just for Laughs? I don't even know if it's still around. Yeah, I had my headphones in, and I was watching on the screen Just for Laughs, and I didn't realize that I was killing myself laughing out loud, like super loud, and my wife is nudging me, telling me to be quiet, and people are looking at me, and they're laughing, but I'm pretty sure they're laughing at me. Not with me. Yeah, that's right. They weren't laughing. This is what we do. If a friend comes over and they say, I'm hungry, all of a sudden you're hungry. A friend says they're doing the Whole 30. It's like, I got to do Whole 30. We begin to do this to each other. I mean, that's powerful when you think about it when it comes to faith. See, oftentimes the higher respect we have for someone, the more we are to mirror what they do in their lives. Influence and courage. This is a really great verse. Oh, man, this verse is awesome. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 and 25, it says, let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promises. Then it says this, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. I love the imagery of this. The Bible is such a clear picture of the human connection when it comes to understanding faith. That if in order for you to fully experience the faith that God has designed you to experience, you must do it within the context of human connection. See those words? That we are to motivate one another, that we are to encourage one another. In an older translation, it says to provoke one another. And that idea of motivation and encouragement and provoke is this idea towards something, which is what? The love and the good deeds that you are called to do in your faith. There are so many of us that are believing the lie that we can do our faith journey on our own, that we want to neglect the relationships and we think, I don't need anybody. We've bought into the Western mindset of the individuality. We worship ourselves. We don't want anybody telling us what to do. We don't want anyone speaking into our lives. And it's time we set our egos and our pride aside and our worship of ourselves and say, what can I do to include some people on my Lego block? Because if I'm going to experience the fullness of the Christian faith, I can't do this on my own. This is not something new for us. This is not something that I've come up with, but it is so clear that what is happening in our culture, we're connected like never before with technology, but we're disconnected from one another. You could be on TikTok, you could be on Instagram, you could be on Facebook, you could be on Snapchat, you could be on whatever else. And TikTok is a thing, by the way, just so you know. I didn't just make that up. It's a proximity thing. It's a proximity thing. See, I think that this is where we're headed. And this is where I think we need to fight against the cultural voices, where we need to allow ourselves the proximity of each other. And I'm not talking about going to the sports bar and having a few bevies with your buddies watching the game this afternoon. TFC's going to win, just so all you soccer fans, just so you know. I'm not talking necessarily about the proximity of going and getting your nails done with some of your friends. I'm really talking about the proximity of people who are on our Lego blocks that know the deepest parts of who we are. We're losing the proximity. So a few years ago, I had someone hurl an accusation at me that came out of the blue. It was an accusation that caused me to go, it surprised me. It rattled me a little bit. Immediately called my wife. She's on my Lego block, just so you know. If you're married, your wife should be on the Lego block, or your husband. Just saying. There's free for you. I called another friend that's connected to my Lego block, like almost immediately. And I said, this is the accusation. The first words out of his mouth were this: Ron, I don't believe that to be true of you. And then he said, I know your character and I know your integrity. There's no way that that is true. Do you know how powerful that was for me to hear? It was a proximity thing. He was close enough to me to know my character, to know who I am. I've given him freedom to be in that space in my life. And he spoke truth to me. There's something that I don't know if we often are able to connect when it comes to faith and God and human connection. See, the proximity thing is a God thing. See, Jesus came to this earth, and he died on a cross for us. He was buried, and he rose again. He walked out of a tomb to conquer sin and death. The whole Christian faith is geared around that event. That event. He walks out of the tomb to make us right with God. For those of us who step into that, trusting Jesus and trusting and by faith what he did for us makes us right with God. But he also walked out of the tomb to make us right with one another. That we cannot separate the two. See, so oftentimes in our journey of faith, we think my relationship with God is here and that my relationship with everybody else is here. When God created Adam and then Eve, there was this human connection that brought about the connection with God in the fullest manner possible. That it wasn't just because Adam needed a human connection. It was because God recognized that in the creation of human beings in his image, and therefore God lives and exists within relationship with himself, there's this beautiful thing that he does where he creates the human connection, so therefore we can experience more of who he is. Because here's the thing. There are times where God uses the voice of someone on our Lego block to speak truth to us, to create the safe space for us, to create the sacred moments with one another. If you neglect that, which the writer of Hebrews says, if we neglect that, then we're robbing ourselves of the beauty and the wonder of the relationship with God. I would almost venture to say that the depth of our relationship with God will be determined by the depth of our connection with others. You can disagree with me if you want. That's okay. I know I'm right. See, there's times in our lives, in our faith, where we need to go to a Lego block friend and say, I messed up today. I failed today with my teenager. Today at work, I lost it on a coworker. Today, I'm feeling the darkness in my soul, and we need someone to be the voice of God. So the question is, there's, I think, two questions. One is, who's on your Lego block? And what do we do to actually have people on our Lego block? Like I thought about this week, as I thought about this conversation and the necessary part of learning to abide in Jesus, because the abide in Jesus is exciting, it's thrilling, it's sometimes very difficult because there's times that we wander and zigzag in our faith, and we need others in our lives to kind of guide us in those seasons. But I started thinking, okay, what do we do in order to invite people onto our Lego block? And I thought, I'm going to give you 4 quick thoughts, just real quick. The first one is this. If it is true that God has designed us to be in human connection, then I think we should pray about it. Thank you for coming. Good to have you here. Pray about it. Ask God who it is that could be invited into the Lego block experience. I love Vital Point Church because there are people that are moving towards connection, because when you think about the connected part of who we are as a church, we want to move you from the rows into teams and into groups, and we want to move you to the spaces where God could potentially create a moment for someone on a team or in a group that you might not even know yet, but yet they become part of your Lego block. So pray about it. A second thing is this, is is take your time. Please, please, please take your time. Because there's nothing worse than getting someone on your Lego block that you got to ask off the Lego block. It's tough, right? So listen, don't go rushing into the atrium of the cafe after the service going, will you be on my Lego block? Take your time. And there's people on your Lego block that you might have to invite off. Don't ghost them. Just take your time. Be wise about it. Just be wise, okay? So that's an important understanding of that, is take your time. Third one is this. Make sure it's a mutual influence. Make sure that there's a commonness in your journey of faith. And maybe consider that there might be some that are a little bit farther down the path in their faith journey than you, because they can bring that wisdom, they can bring that experience, they can bring that voice. So there's this mutual understanding between the two of you, that it's not just about them for you, but you for them. I came across this quote this week. If you become the friend your heart longs for, you'll have all the friends you need. If you become the friend your heart longs for, you'll have all the friends you need. So first one is this: begin to pray and ask God. Take your time about it. Make sure that there's a mutual influence. And this last one is, don't expect those on your Lego block to be perfect. So some of you may not know this, but Jesus takes his three and goes a little bit farther into the garden to pray, okay? He says, guys, stay here, pray. He goes over here and he prays. He comes back, guess what they're doing? Sleeping. Yep, sound asleep. Now, we can't point the finger at them. They just had a big meal, right? So we cut some slack for them, okay? So Jesus says, come on, guys, smack, 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 wake up. He comes over here, prays again, goes back, guess what? Sleeping. Third time, comes over here and prays, comes back, sleeping again. The truth about relationship and human connection is that we're going to hurt one another. There's times where we're going to miss things. We're not going to be aware. There's times we're going to let each other down. But let's give room for grace. Let's give room for forgiveness. Let's give room for pushing into those tough times so that we can become resilient in our friendships. Resilience is such a key thing for this time and age in which we live. We're so quick to, it goes wrong, I'm out. Why not lean in just a little bit more and find the resilience? See, I don't know about you. You can play if you like. Can you do that? Yeah, I'm micromanaging. That was good. That was really good. You got me. Who's on your Lego block? Come on. Who's on your Lego block? I wonder if some of us this year, as 2019 comes to an end, that we need to set a goal that says, you know what? I'm going to fight against this worship of self, and I am going to pray, and I'm going to ask God to bring some people into my life that will be connected to my Lego block. I know who mine are. Actually, this morning, sitting in the front, I motioned to a friend of mine, and I held up the Lego block, and I pointed at him. I said this, and I have my wife's on there, and I have 3 other good friends. Don't try to abide in Jesus alone. Follow his pattern. Follow his rhythm. If Jesus has to take 3 with him farther into the garden to pray, how much more do we need that? See, I think it comes down to we need people who will fight for us and with us.